Hello and welcome to the Web of Light show during the Christmas season. Can you tell? I'm Dr. Kevin and this is...
Angie Donju. Yes, we're doing it.
I worked so hard. You ruined it all. So,
No, the French teacher did it.
you know, she's a Canadian speaking teacher. She's not really a French teacher. For those of you who have been following us, you know that for months now I've been trying to get Angie to pronounce her name Angie D'Anjou. She is Angie D'Anjou. And every time she goes, I'm Angie D'Anjou, I always go, no, it's D'Anjou. I finally got her to say D'Anjou, and we're having a Cards Against Humanity game, and somebody who speaks Quebecois French and teaches Quebecois French says, oh no, it's D'Anjou. And we're like, oh God, here we go again. That's all right. I'm persistent. It may take the next 5 years of correcting you, but we're going to keep doing this. And you're going to get to keep watching here on Web of Light. So, Miss Angie, we are about a little more than a week out from Christmas. And what is going on in your world? What's up?
I'm actually kind of buckering back down because it's the holiday. So holiday time, getting ready and preparing for the holidays, getting some stuff together with you so we can get going with the center. Yes.
For those of you who may have missed the grand announcement, which happened just before Thanksgiving, Angie and I are actually opening up a Web of Light Healing Center in Hudson. It will be associated with the Web of Light Expo that we're doing Earth Day weekend in April. And obviously the Web of Light TV show, which is all standing on the Web of Light Foundation, where we're helping to create leaders of the pack and support people who are bringing light into the world.
So I am offering some space to the foundation to do what they need to do.
Now, we have a lot of stuff coming up in the space. We've got a lot of holiday stuff. And so, first of all, we have to start because, you know, I've been doing the whole Christmas shirt thing for the season.
Oh, yes.
And in honor of today's guest, and you'll find out when we introduce her, I have chosen to wear Yoda Santa. Do you know what Yoda Santa brings to little kids?
It should be good. What does Yoda Santa bring to little kids?
Enough smarts to never grow up. But wouldn't it be great that instead of gifts for Christmas, and this would be a Yoda thing to do, I truly believe it, that instead of giving kids tons and tons of gifts, maybe one memorable, meaningful gift that represents the personality and interest of the child, and then instead of 12 days of Christmas, you know, and tons of gifts, that you gave the child the gift of a time and an experience with that child one-on-one. That my Christmas gift is that you and I are going to spend this afternoon doing whatever you want today. Now, I'd like to see parents do more of that all on, but saying, my gift is we're going to go do something and we're going to make a memory. And maybe we'll take a picture of the memory, maybe we'll take a video of it, but we're going to make a memory of this. What do you think? Do you think we would be having less issues if we had more Christmas gifts?
It's kind of funny you're saying that because honestly with my children, and they're all grown now, but that was part of our annual Christmas thing with our little family, was we didn't get the elaborate gifts. Maybe they got something that they really wanted to have, but we would all get together, put our money together, and we go someplace. We plan a trip, we plan to go somewhere, experience something. So that was like, that's actually, I've been doing that all my life.
Well,
so, and it is good because it brings you the opportunity to put that financial gain to something that it's a nice memory. The family is together for that week or whatever you've planned out in the near future.
Well, I think that that's a great idea. And, you know, and some of the things, and I don't have children. I mean, I think the last count I have 4.5 million children, which are my ADD and my ADHD kids. But, you know, I never fathered per se, a child, though I've been involved in a lot of children's lives through the years, and I'm many a person's favorite gay uncle. But in in this though, some of the best Christmases, even as a kid or as a teenager, something like this, was when I made gifts or I got handmade gifts. And so I think, wouldn't it be great to bring back that tradition and say, look, we're going to spend $20 on supplies, and you're going to make a gift or a couple of gifts. And we're going to make gifts. And maybe the gifts are edible. I mean, I gave out dipping oils one year. We grew herbs in my own garden, made dipping oil that I let set for 4 months, 3 months when we harvested it, 3-4 months. And I gave bottles of dipping oil that were handmade, and I took into consideration the kind of spices and things. And so each oil was different. I mean, I feel like if we did more of, this isn't about getting gift, but this is about giving and getting a piece of ourselves with somebody that we love.
That's actually it's a good idea. However, I will say to you,
Here we go.
yeah, I know. Here I go.
Here we
I'm going to
go.
be a Debbie Downer. If you really look at the craziness of our society today, some people just don't have the moments to, separate from that wheel that everybody's on. And so that kind of holds them back from saying, well, maybe I'll go home and work on this, because at that point they're working on X, Y, and Z, so that they can get ready to do the whole thing all over again the next day.
Well,
So, it's something that we as a society need to start to really look at that and embed it and say, where's the balance?
well, and balance is a key word. Balance is absolutely a key word. But one of the things is, and I know that I spent a lot of time with my grandmother when I was young, because my mother worked and my father worked, and I spent a lot of time. And TV was still a semi-new thing. Wasn't brand new. I'm not that old, but it was a newish thing. And my grandmother would not let me sit at her house and watch TV unless I was doing something. And she taught me how to knit, and she taught me how to crochet, and she taught me how to do not needlepoint, but to quilt. And I was always doing something with my hands while I would watch TV. And when you get people into something where they're expressing their creativity or creating something or doing something, and they can do it from a place of non-self-judgment, it is calming, it is peaceful, it is stress-reducing. And I think that it would be an opportunity that if we got kids more involved in crafts, and maybe find out that they can build a snowman out of popsicle sticks or whatever better than mommy can. And that's really empowering to a child, actually, So I don't know. I think that you say there's not enough time in the day, but I look and I bet there's pockets of time where all that's done is stress, worry, and what you think you have to do or supposed to do for somebody else, instead of doing something that's an act of love. If we did more acts of love, there would be less room for acts of hate.
True.
So I'm going to pass you to the quote, and then we're going to get our guest on.
All right. Well, our quote today comes from Pablo Picasso. He was a Spanish painter, sculptor, printmaker. He's also a poet and playwright, and he spent most of his adult life in France, of course.
Where there's a whole family of D'Anjous.
So the quote of the day today is, all children are artists. The problem is how to remain an artist once he grows up. And that came from Pablo Picasso. And I chose this quote primarily to allow everyone to realize that, again, we were just talking about all of this information about creating something for the holidays. If you give a child something to do, they are artists. They do have creativity. But as we grow older, we start to let other things get in our way and get involved with all kinds of issues and problems and all of this. And we forget that we all have artistic worth in each of us. And so we have to move along with this and remember to keep my artistic values going. What do you think?
Well, and I think that you chose a quote to prove the point I was trying to make. And I hadn't read your quote. So I really think that's funny. It sits up there on the screen, so you can, but it was your day to read the quote, so I didn't even bother to read it. But I think that one of the interesting things is when we empower the artist in our children, we rediscover the artist in ourselves.
Very true.
And so, you know, when you can return to the place of your childlike side and play and discover and create and be an artist with your child, it is the best gift you can give them, bar none.
Yes, it is. And you know, one of the points of this quote was because of an experience I just had. So I had my granddaughter Vivi, and we started to work with our imagination. I, of course, for people who don't know, I do a lot of guided meditations. And I decided, seeing as she's 11, I was going to check and see how she did with guided meditations. So I did a guided meditation with her. And once she started to speak the whole piece, her elaborate descriptions of the meditation that she went through, we went on a journey, she brought back to me my realization that I've released and allowed myself not to have as much journaling as I've done in the past, and not to have so much creative writing as I have in the past. So it was kind of a learning piece for me, because that's what happened.
I love it when you prove my point. You should, because you know I journal twice a day. You should see my journal. I have at least 10 to 12, probably more, closer to 20 different colored pens and pencils. And my journal, I have blocks of color and different colors, and I'll highlight this, and sometimes I'm writing this way, and sometimes I'm writing that way and stuff. And I do that twice a day. You know, it's so that my creativity doesn't like completely evolve, you know, envelop everybody that's around me. I mean, they don't call me Hurricane Kevin for nothing.
So it's not to, you know, it's not to enlighten you to journal more. It's just to enlighten you to play with your arts.
So speaking about artistic people and people that like to create and create havoc in the world, what about today's guest?
Today's guest we have here is a very unique person that I've known for quite a many years.
So, Emerald Greenpeace GreenForest, formerly known as Amethyst Wildfire. When I first met her, she was Amethyst. And she's an internationally known speaker, spiritual leader, and transformation artist. She helps visionary entrepreneurs and global change agents to become crystal clear about their message and massively magnetic to money so that they can move, so they can fund their movements and fulfill their missions. Welcome, Emerald. How are you today?
I'm filled with fabulosity, Kevin. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm doing, you know, I always say I'm between fine, I'm between fabulous and fantastic. It depends on whether I look at this side of the dictionary or this.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much for having me, both of you. It's a pleasure. You and I have been colleagues and working partners and friends
different pieces,
and,
yes.
Yeah, spiritual helpers with each other for a very long time. And Kevin, you and I have known one another also for a very long time, and it's a beautiful opportunity to be in your sacred space that you have created to allow for the building and development and transmission of this web of light work. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're glad to have you.
Glad to have you. Yeah.
Like I said, I picked Yoda because you were coming on today. So, you know, what are you up to? So I want to know, I would like you to, if you're comfortable, I'd like you to share the story, Amethyst Wildfire to Emerald.
Peaceful Green Forest.
Peaceful.
So
Green
I think
Forest.
that actually requires a backstory, Kevin, because before I was Amethyst Wildfire, I had a different name as well. And I think it's really important to get that little backstory first before we move into the story of this present transformation process.
I'm trying to remember, because when you met, when we first met, It was before I was Dr. Kevin, because I
Yeah.
didn't have my doctorate
Yeah.
yet. And I'm trying to remember, were you amethyst? I think I might have.
I was probably at that point.
Okay, I was.
But newly, probably very newly amethyst.
Because I think we met in the early 90s.
Probably not.
Mid-90s?
Probably not. Probably not. So,
It's so hard when
so
you've
let me
been
give you
around.
the backstory.
Give us the backstory.
Because it's really a story of creativity, and it's really a story that that speaks to your whole conversation right now about gifts and about artistry and about creativity and about how we serve our children and also how we serve ourselves into becoming and remembering that we are creators. So up until 2001, I was a real estate developer and common interest community consultant. And my last project was 51 single-family homes, 56 apartments, and an office building up in Merrimack, New Hampshire. I was very left-brained, very masculinized woman in a very masculine career. And in 2001, I had a spiritual awakening. And I had that spiritual awakening in August of that year. I had joined a yoga class in May, and by August of that year, I knew that things were broiling and boiling in my life. I had awareness starting to dawn. And when I had the spiritual awakening, I literally had my third eye open up in the park in a yoga class and started to see golden white orbs of light going up and down this beautiful golden staircase. And when I sat up from the yoga experience and I opened my physical eyes, I saw that everyone in the park was a golden white orb of light. And so as a result of that spiritual awakening, I started to really look at the way my life had been structured. And up until then, my life was very much structured the way that Angie was talking about earlier, being on the hamster wheel. It was like, okay, I got to get up, I got to go to work, I got to do this, and I got to do that, and I've got to make money, and I've got to, be wearing the clothes that everybody wants me to wear, and living in the house that everybody wants me to live in. And I had the typical, I had my White House with my dog and my car in the garage and my husband and my kid and the Jordan Marsh charge card and my special purse. And, I was living the, quote, American dream, but I was horribly miserable inside and questing. Like there was this inner part of me that was questing and asking, is this it? Is this it? And I think that part of me was this latent, untapped part that was filled with gifts. And, as you were talking about Christmas and about children and about working with our children and spending time with our children, instead of giving them gifts, perhaps the greatest gift is for them to recognize and be recognized and acknowledged as already having gifts. Because what happened to me after my spiritual awakening was that all of a sudden, all my latent gifts started to show themselves. My artist came out, my healer came out, my author came out, my performer came out, my speaker came out, my messenger came out. It was like I had this huge pile of gifts that I didn't even know I had, and that had to be put into service and be served into the bowl of life in order for me to feel alive. And so as a result of that spiritual awakening, over the course of a couple of years, I ended up receiving a new name, and that's a story in and of itself. And so part of my journey was literally dying to the old self that I had been created, that was kind of created by the expectations of social conditioning and cultural conditioning and family conditioning and religious conditioning, and like that outside me had to die so that the inside me could be born. And so Amethyst Wildfire came as a result of that whole process. And for 13 years, she served very well to light things on fire. And this spring, I had another major spiritual transformation.
So before you go into that, I'd like to, I always consider myself the voice of the audience.
Sure.
Asking questions. So we have somebody out there right now that's watching this. They're standing on that precipice, and that fall has started to go from who am I supposed to be to who I am.
Yeah,
And that makes the Grand Canyon look like this big.
sure.
We all know how far we can get away. What piece of advice would you give that person in this moment that can feel that they're falling, and it feels a whole lot like falling out of control?
Oh, great question. So there's a few pieces of guidance I would offer. One is I had to literally lose my mind to find my heart. And it does feel like everything is falling apart. It does feel like you are losing control because you've organized your whole life in a certain way. And so when we grow and when we evolve, let's imagine that you are the caterpillar, right? I'm the caterpillar. I'm moving along on this, path, and I'm inching my way along the earth, and then all of a sudden, out of some place inside me that's instinctual that I didn't even know existed, I suddenly have this desire to go up. And I crawl my way up this tree and I land on a leaf, and then I literally open up my guts and wrap myself in this leaf and go dissolve into literally almost nothingness. But what's left is this energy and this instinctual force of life that is going to ultimately result in the opening of the cocoon and a butterfly being born. And if you look at the caterpillar, you would not necessarily see the butterfly. If you look at the acorn, you're not going to necessarily see the oak tree, but it's there. So trust is a huge, huge, huge part of this process. Trust that if you are on that precipice and you're feeling that, oh my God, like feeling of everything is out of control, right? Which a lot of us have just recently gone through in the last month or so. Everything that we thought we knew about how we were organized as a country has been shaken, right? Everything's shaking. And so also to remember that there's kind of two ways that you can go. So for me, I took a leap. Now, some of us are leapers. I knew if I stayed in the real estate business with the partner that I had, who was a bully and an angry man and very toxic, but I didn't know it when I was in it. And it wasn't until I started to grow out of it that I could see that I was in a cesspool, right, of toxic energy. As I leapt out of that, I knew I had to leap out or I would literally die. I knew I couldn't stay another second. And I leapt without a net, but by leaping without a net, I literally found my wings. Now, I am a leaper. Not everyone is. And so what I want to say for those of you who are out there in the audience who know that you're being called, know that you're being pulled in a new direction, know that you're literally facing the abyss of the unknown, and you know you can't stay where you are, and you don't really know how you're going to get to where you're going, then you can take a step. So you can either leap and trust that your wings are going to open, or you can simply take a step, and then you take the next step, and then you take the next step, and then you take the next step. So that's what I would say to the watcher.
And one of the things I'm going to actually put in here is that, you have the people that are ready to leap. I was a leaper.
Not surprised.
It's somehow occasionally confused with a leper. Because people thought I was crazy and it was contagious.
Exactly, me too.
Uh-huh. And then you have the people that kind of have to, like tippy-toe into the water and tippy-toe in the water. But I also want the listeners to understand, if you know that change is coming, it may slow down for you or it may run you over.
Exactly.
And it will if it doesn't, there is a point where you will get pushed off the ledge.
Exactly.
And so, one of the things when I work with people, and I'm sure Angie's the same way, is that sometimes you can look and say, honey, you might want to step a little faster or you are going to get pushed off that ledge because you can feel it coming at them.
Yeah.
And you don't want to see them get pushed because that is even more shocking.
I will, I was one who was pushed off the ledge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that surprise you?
No, I knew that Angie was a step-by-stepper. I knew that Angie, and what we have to do, I think, Kevin, is we have to honor each person's journey because each person's journey is unique, and we also, those of us who are leapers and those of us who are step-by-steppers, we all have something to offer in way of motivation and inspiration and support for those people that are our people. So some of my people are definitely leapers. They come to work with me, these women come to work with me, and they're called and they know they've got to take a quantum leap. They know that they've got to make a jump, and they know that they want somebody to fly wingtip to wingtip with them, shall we say, right? Mm-hmm. So I can open my wings and I can say, here we go, we're going, right? We're going to jump, we're going to do it right now. And then there are some people who come to work with me who are step-by-steppers, and I have come to understand that it's also important for me to be able to serve the step-by-steppers so they don't get whacked with what we call the cosmic 2x4, but are able to take like a little hop. So sometimes what happens with the step-by-steppers is you get hop, 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 leap, right? So to give them the tools and the resources and the opportunity to have the support that allows them to take those little hop, hop, hops, where eventually they will recognize and acknowledge and see that they themselves have wings too. Mm-hmm.
But also when you are pushed, you do acknowledge and you do gain a lot of insight into how to help others to establish the hopping.
Sure.
So absolutely. It's kind of like, I believe that each person experiences this in a different pattern because of what they're going to be involved with.
Absolutely.
And well, and I had an image as you were talking, which is why I laughed. Mm-hmm. I know you saw me laugh, which is there's somebody and they're it's like they're running at one of those decks in a lake to jump in. And you realize that they need a little more running space, so you're just in front of them, and you're adding extra boards.
Exactly.
And you add a few more extra boards, and then suddenly you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I can stop now.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah, I got it.
Exactly.
And sometimes that's what we have to do.
So I also want to make sure that the audience realizes that when we're talking about this, it's not a matter of I'm just going into my spiritual realm and making my new cocoon. Yeah. When we go into this spiritual way of looking at things, we still work. We
Sure.
still benefit community.
Sure. I want to actually put that right down into the practical, because one of the things that happened for me is I spent 20 years in the real estate business. I know how to put the numbers in the boxes. I know how to put the foundations in the ground, right? Mm-hmm. I was steeped in this depth of structure and practicality and kind of materialization capacity, right? And then I had this massive spiritual awakening. It was like Pandora's box opened, right? Mm-hmm. But I came to understand, first I had to give myself permission to explore. And sometimes that means cutting an hour out of your day, or 2 hours, or eventually 3 hours, or maybe 5 hours, or 3 weeks, or whatever. It means literally making space for the sacred to bloom, to blossom, right? And weeding out some of the structural things that we've put into place that we feel are keeping us safe or keeping us in our, in our routine or whatever. Sometimes we have to look and say, that's not working anymore, right? That's simply not working anymore. And then so we sacrifice. And to me, sacrificing is making sacred. When we sacrifice, we make sacred that which is now important to us, and we cut away everything that is no longer important to us. And so for me, it's all about, I became very clear I needed to create the space for the spiritual opening and to like celebrate and be joyful and playful with these gifts that I was sending. It was like, whoa, it was Christmas like every day for a couple of years. And then it started to become clear that I needed to generate. I needed to take these gifts and deliver them into the bowl of life and be generative, including generating revenue. Because when I left a real estate career, I was newly divorced and had 2 years of, I then spent 2 years sitting on the floor, like exploring my gifts and playing, but I was living off of the reserves that I had created in all of that 20-year time. And so ultimately, then I became clear that I had to marry the two together, right? I can't be super spiritual and not also be practical. It's about building that bridge between the worlds. And I think a lot of people who are terrified, that are feeling the call, that are on the ledge, that know they have to move forward and they can't figure out how, the biggest fear that they have is their economic security.
Well, and you know, part of it is economic security is an illusion.
Sure.
You can get
But
laid
that's
off
the biggest fear
tomorrow.
that they have.
You can, you know, your company can go out of business tomorrow. I mean, yeah, there was a time when corporations had ethics, morals, and a soul. That time came and passed. And we see some that are coming back, but they're certainly not the majority. So there is no such thing as ultimate loyalty to the employee out there. So those people that are holding on, going, you know, and even if you work for yourself, real estate market up, down,
Sure.
all over the
Sure.
place, things happen, shift, change. You know, I remember clearly taking that leap from the corporate world into full-time spiritual catalyst, and you know, and I think that's where you and I first connected, was because that's a lot of times people would talk about me as the most practical, pragmatic, spiritual person they ever met, and it seemed like it was a dichotomy that they couldn't wrap themselves around. Like, well, you can't be practical and pragmatic and talk about this stuff if you're spiritual. And I'm like, no, you have to talk about it spiritually.
Exactly.
So how did that transition? Because I want to make sure we hear, because I know Angie's got some questions for you, but I want to hear, where did Amethyst Wildfire turn into the embers of Emerald Peaceful?
Yeah, Emerald Peaceful Green Forest. So that's a pretty intense story, Kevin. And it goes along with the whole conversation that we've been having about how we put ourselves into a certain structure, and then we end up having to, the structures naturally eventually will break down in order for the next thing to flower. So for 13 years I was Amethyst Wildfire, and in the last year, a little bit more than a year, well, during that time, for about 7 years of that time, I was a single mom, raising my son on my own, going through his adolescence from 14 to 21. And I was building my business. And I was building a business that I built intentionally, very intentionally. It became very clear to me when he was about 13, 14 years old that I absolutely had to be present for him as a parent. But I was also, again, in that place of being called, that I had to serve my purpose, which was to be a messenger and to serve women around the world and help them to find their voice and say yes to their calling, and also claim their value and generate revenue. So in the last 8 years, I've managed to actually generate almost $2 million from home, while at the same time I've been parenting, because I tapped into my own creative power. I connected with my source of inspiration, and thank you, God, for the technology angels, which have given us the internet, that have allowed me to serve my purpose and to be able to be heard literally by millions of people around the world. And Amethyst Wildfire, that energy was absolutely there was a necessity for that energy to be embedded, and for me to embody that energy in order to be able to serve the purpose of spreading the light literally all over the world, and at the same time serve the purpose of parenting this child. So during the last 7 years of my business building, he also started to go through adolescence and ended up, highly empathic young man, ended up having some drug addiction problems. some pretty severe drug addiction problems, repeated suicide attempts, engaged in heroin and cocaine and all of every possible drug that you can imagine he was working with. He was, and it was very challenging, very difficult, very intense, very, very, very exercising my faith muscles and my trust and my grounding in my source of inspiration time for me and for him. And this past spring, it came to a head. And in the experience of it coming to a head, at the end of that experience, where literally I was locked in the basement by him and threatened to be killed while he was in a state, an altered state of high adrenaline, I escaped, thankfully, and got out of the basement and called the police. And the next day, as I was sitting in meditation, the day after this whole experience happened, I heard, "You're Emerald now." So literally, Amethyst Wildfire did die that night in the basement. And when I was in this intense, dramatic, unbelievably dangerous to both of us situation, what I needed to do was surrender and call on every ounce of my spiritual teachings and practice to just surrender. And while I was in that space, I went right into meditation. It became clear to me that I could not fight with somebody who was completely in absolute fight or flight. Like, he was in fight or flight and he was not coming out. So the answer was not to fight that. The answer was to go in and to find that sacred, clear, centered space and to surrender to the spirit. And my prayer was, if tonight I'm going to die, please just don't let it hurt. And I could feel Master Jesus's presence with me in the basement. And afterwards, the next day, I was in my meditation and I heard, "You're Emerald now." And then the day after that, I heard, "You're Emerald GreenForest." And this time it came from within. So the name Amethyst Wildfire came from without. Master Jesus came and actually gave me my name, Amethyst, put his hands on my head back in 2004 in a meditation and said, "You are Amethyst." And I said, "Okay, I am." And Master Jesus took me back to heaven, or took Amethyst back to heaven that night. And out of that, Emerald Peaceful GreenForest was born. And so I didn't realize it until probably 6 or 8 weeks later that there was another death. There was another death, a death of that identity. And so it's a really powerful time for all of us to recognize that we can die to an identity and be reborn and recreate ourselves in a new identity. And that is the way of evolution. That is life living itself to its next highest level. And so that's the story.
Well,
since you asked.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, and we have talked on this show before that life is, it's so funny that so many people fear death, because life is a never-ending cycle of deaths and rebirths.
Exactly.
It's just the nature of life. Mm-hmm. That's the nature of life. And, about a year and a half ago, I had put something out where I said, if I die today, it would be okay. Mm-hmm. And all the reasons. And it was very clear. It's not that I'm asking to die today, but I'm very complete.
I'm complete, exactly. I'm complete.
I'm very complete.
So.
And stuff like that. And I had people that were very upset. Are you sick? Is there something wrong? Are you, I'm like, no. But when there is no fear of death, it's so funny because you and I align on that. I'd be more like, don't cripple me up as a quadriplegic with no ability to speak for the rest of my life, and don't make it really painful. Everything else is fine.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, it was simply just, if tonight's the night, I just would really like it to not hurt too much.
Yeah.
I really would like it to not hurt too much. And I think one of the things that is important to put into this space is to really remember that we actually do have the life force and the creative power to initiate our own rebirthing process. We have within us innately, and we can either work with it, coming back to the working with it or working against it, right? We can either work with it and be conscious and be aware and use all the tools that we have in our toolbox, which I totally did that night. I was so grounded in the present moment. It was just I'm taking a breath. Mm-hmm. I'm taking the next breath. Yeah. I'm making a conscious choice not to engage and inflame this any further. I'm coming into a state of centered peacefulness and presence and making a choice about what is most important to me right now. And in that moment, what was most important to me was, how can I best serve to diffuse this situation such that we both have the rebirthing opportunity? And thank you, God, because he could have been dead that night. I could have been dead, physically dead that night. Or the way that our structured pattern as mother-son was created could die, and each of us could move on to a different way of expressing ourselves. And that's basically what's happened. And I'm happy to say that, through the work of the court system and with the help of his father, thank you to his father, he is now clean and has a job and, is on his path, his own soul path, that I know, I could see that all of this is in service. Even though it seemed dramatic and even though it seemed intense, it was in service. It was in service to me, it was in service to him, it was in service to our evolution.
Mm-hmm. So there's a child here who had the first several years of his life with one mother.
Yeah.
Had the next part of his life with a different mother.
Yeah, now has a third one.
Now has a third one.
Yeah. So he's had modeled for him that you can die and be reborn.
Yes.
He most definitely has one of the things that happened when we had a suicide attempt about 3 or 4 years ago, and a lot of what I was carrying was guilt. I carried a lot of guilt, and that guilt needed to be exorcised from me, right? Because my guilt was perpetuating experiences that added to the guilt. And so we had this suicide experience about 3 years ago, and after the experience, I actually had a premonition, I had precognition that something was going to happen, right? I knew something was going to happen. I had been given information, I had been shown that I was letting go of his hand and his guide was coming in. I saw all of that in advance. So when the suicide attempt happened, I knew that it was a rite of passage. He was actually giving himself a rite of passage, trying to die to his child self so that he could become a man, right? And because our culture doesn't have rites of passage for our men, very good at this point, our culture doesn't provide a structure for that.
They don't have functional, healthy ones.
Functional, healthy ones, right. So our youth are turning to drugs, they're turning to gangs, they're turning to criminal activities, they're turning to all kinds of, they're like searching for rites of passage. Women don't have great rites of passage either, so our culture really is being called to find ways to give us these rites of passage. Otherwise, we're going to be a complete culture of, uninitiated people. Uninitiated who have never left our, childhood wounds and all of those other things. But in any case, during that suicide attempt, about 2 weeks afterwards, when I was kind of dealing with my own feelings of guilt and should I have done something different and how could I have prevented this and all those stupid questions that just aren't getting you moving forward, I got a guidance. I had a little message from the upstairs team, and I was shown a pomegranate. And what I heard was, all the juicy seeds are in him. All the juicy seeds are in him. And so I was given the gift of, let yourself off the hook. All the juicy seeds are in him. Now he's on his third iteration of what it looks like to have a mother, or maybe not. Maybe the whole role of mother has now been exploded. He's an adult now. He's 21. He's creating his own life, right? He lived in an environment where spiritual practices and deep inner work and saying yes to your calling and creating your own life were modeled for him. So all the juicy seeds are in him, and he has his own soul path, and so do I. So, yeah, so nice deep breath on that.
So I'm going to ask one more question and take a break for a second so that Angie can ask some questions. Which is, how does this man-child, because 21 to me is still a man-child.
Sure.
How does he interrelate with Emerald, and does he see the difference?
Right now there's
between
a
Emerald?
restraining order.
So there is no interaction.
Yeah, there's no interaction right now.
Okay.
There's a restraining order, and that's in effect until May, and so we shall see. I actually, by the court order, am in the space of, I get to choose when. I get to choose. I'm the one that will, in writing, say, I'm ready to open the door, and let's see what happens. And I'm not choosing that right now because I feel like part of the work is letting the bird fly.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
I would agree. I also want to commend you on something that I have seen that has been very difficult for parents that have to do sometimes, which is set a very hard, fast, in this case even legal boundary, knowing they have to grow from the consequences of their actions and see where it brings them.
Sure.
And, there's a lot of parents that even going through what you go through or went through or some variation of it still might feel guilty or bad or hesitate to that somehow it's their failure that they would have to put a restraining order on their child.
Sure.
Instead of seeing this child is evolving into someone that is still may not be making good decisions, and they clearly need to do this, and I need to not be part of it.
Sure.
So that's a really great thing.
Well, ultimately, too, Kevin, I think what's really important to take out of this story, because it's a narrative, right? I played a role in it, he played a role in it, but it is a narrative, and so if we look at it from a spiritual perspective and look at the mythic map that we are looking at in this narrative, is to break the mold of the mother role, right? And to maybe go back to recognizing that I'm a human being person, I'm a person who delivered through my portal this being, right? And our mother, my mother, his mother, your mother, is our mother, the earth. And if we can begin to come into right relationship with the earth as our mother provider and spirit as our father illuminator individually, then we start to untangle all of the entanglements and all of the denser energies of guilt and expectation and cultural and religious and societal and familial conditioning that have been applied to all of these roles and have caused the densification of each of us as beings. And let's restore ourselves back to our source and begin to look at our natural gifts that we each came to bring, and help each other to connect in and deliver those gifts to the earth. Like acknowledge each other. Oh my goodness, look at the gifts you have. Look at the gifts you have. Look at the earth and all the gifts that she has. And how do we co-create and collaborate with our own natural gifts and acknowledging them and developing them, rather than saying, you're Kevin and you got to go in this box because you're a boy, and you're Angie and you got to go in this box because you're a girl, and you're Kevin and you got to go in this box because you're the uncle, and you're Angie and you got to go in this box because you're the grandmother, and really remove those roles completely and start to deepen our access to our creative power and say, what do we want instead? Because if it's not working, why would we keep putting our life force energy into something that's not working? What do we want instead?
So we've only got a few minutes left before the show's over. So Angie, what would you like to ask or comment or say before we give them our closing?
Well, one of the most remarkable pieces of your story are that you did have that trust that by letting go of the motherly strings, in this case, because of an addiction, it's just an amazing miracle, because you've actually given your son that chance that a lot of people in the same condition would not have given that same chance to. Because I know many people right now, and we're talking about New Hampshire, and we know New Hampshire right now is one of the top states known with addictions of these types. And one of the things that a lot of people in our community are doing is putting that guilt and harboring, like they're putting the wings around these people that are having these addictions, and so therefore they're actually doing more harm than good. Because when we metamorphose, like you said, we went from amethyst to emerald. When we do that transition, and everyone goes through those transitions, they may not change their name, but we do go through transitions. And this is giving your son that opportunity to fall on his face and bring up that transition.
Yep.
And
it
it's
requires
nobody
trust.
else's guilt, it's what's within him, not what came from his families. And I'm a true believer, because I change people's perspectives all the time in my work. I have many people that come to me and say, oh, he always made me feel like this, or she always made me do all these things, and that's why I can't get this done, or this is why I'm not stepping forward.
And they're disempowered.
And they're disempowering themselves over things that were from the past, or people that were in their past. And truly, once they see their inner being and what they can accomplish, and forgive the past and use it as, I'm empowered now, then I see them time after time grow and blossom.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, that's my piece with you, is how does one get that courage to finally say, I'm going to take those wings away now. And I'm going to...
In 30 seconds.
Oh, I don't think I can do it in 30 seconds. But what I want to say is, again, I want to come back to the fear thing that we talked about earlier. Fear of the illusion, right? And then really recognizing that there are ways that we perpetuate the illusion. So one of the things I do with the women I work with is I help them to overcome the 5 ways that women ward off wealth. We literally ward off wealth. And the 5 ways that we do it are: we worry, we wait, we whine, we withdraw, or we waffle, meaning we're indecisive. So to answer your question directly, I had to stop waffling. I had to stop worrying, I had to stop whining and saying, oh my God, this horrible thing is happening. I had to become decisive, and I had to decide in service to life. I had to choose love. See this bracelet I have here? Every single one of these beads is infused with the mantra, nothing is stronger than love. And I've been wearing this for over a year now. I had to surrender to life and love and choose life. I had to choose life for myself first in order for him to be able to have his life and to be free of worry, whining, waiting, waffling, or withdrawing from life. And to overcome those things allows us to welcome wealth and allows us to be in a state of wonder. I wonder what's going to happen next. I don't know what's going to happen next with him. And I don't know whether or not I will have contact with him. But I do know one thing, Kevin. I do know one thing, Angie. I will always continue to say my prayer. Never let me lose my sense of awe and wonder.
And we're going to call it a wrap here at Web of Light. Come back and join us next week when can't even tell you. I think we're going to be doing astrology next week for the upcoming sign of Capricorn. Emerald, thank you for being here.
Thank you
Thank
for having
you.
me.